Welcome to another session, To Be or Not to Be. That is the question for those who are interested in the compatibility of Christianity and science. This is session 5, which I just called Intelligence in the System. I just want to remind you of the signposts. I do this every time because I think it is important. It is very important that we know what our worldview is. Our worldview determines what we see. It determines what our values are, what our attitudes are towards circumstances, situations, and people. It will also reflect in our behavior and our belief system. The second point I have is that absolute truth is unequivocal. There is only one truth. This philosophy of anyone chooses his own truth is just not correct. In fact, it is false. The third point I want to just highlight again is that nature is prescriptive. Nature is what it is. Science will describe what we see and try and explain it. That makes us smart, but not as smart as the one who put it there, okay? And then there's also a big difference between historical science and forensics and operational science. Operational science, remember, is the stuff that is based on observation, a hypothesis, an idea that we think that could explain it, many experiments, and then we develop a theory which may or may not become a law of nature. But the main point is that it is science that is doing the explaining and the describing, while nature is there and it is prescriptive. And the purpose of the talks, you remember, is to provide a rational and reasonable set of arguments for Christian apologetics, which means defending Christianity in the light of science. So the other purposes I want to make you think, to get better insight, maybe, possibly some wisdom, as to the why the world works like it does. I want you to see the bigger picture. And the rules and the laws of life are, of course, given. We had no choice in our presence here, in our existence here, but we now have life. So what is the ultimate meaning and purpose of this life? And as I said, I just want you to think. So I call it Explore Deeper. What will we discuss in a talk like this? Well, I want to point out to you that the world is very complex and we are bombarded with information every single day. But what exactly is information and how did it get to be here? Remember, information alone is not knowledge, and knowledge is not the same as having insight or even wisdom. Intelligence has to be added in each step to get from knowledge to getting to insight and understanding and wisdom. The other point I want to discuss in this talk is there must be an originator mind and a receiver mind to make anything of information. Otherwise, information has no meaning. Information is only information when you transmit it and when you receive it, between those two parties. And how does this tie into science and Christianity? Well, here's a brain. We all have one, but do we use it? Secular science tells us there is only matter and energy. There is nothing else, no matter what you think, what you say. But that is not quite true, as I will show you, because there's also information, there is intelligence, and there is purpose in this universe, as I will show you, hopefully, during the course of this talk. So if we start off with information, what is it actually? And is information necessarily always true? Or can it be false? If it is false, it is wrong. If it is true, it is correct. Matter and energy, that's all there is? As they say in the sales brochures, wait, there is more. There is information, and there is life, which is not caught in material and energy. If you have a lot of data, that might mean, for example, you have all the cell phone numbers of South Africa. Then you got data. But if you had the cell phone numbers plus their owners, then you would have information, because that's useful. Data in itself is not useful, but information means you've added something. And information only becomes knowledge if you can see a relationship between those various pieces of information. In other words, to use this example of the cell phone again, I've got all the cell phone numbers, I've got all the owners, I've got their addresses, and see who phones whom and get connections. I'm not saying that is what we must do, that is just an example, okay? So what has to be added to make it sensible, this whole thing? It is intelligence, because intelligence will give us insight. But what does it entail? It means we have to use our minds. And yes, the mind sits in the brain, but the brain is not the mind. It's not about IQ either, as you will see in a moment. Now, we can look at mathematics, the laws of mathematics. We can say, for example, 21 plus 7 is 28, and everybody will be happy with that. At least I hope so. That's true. 4 times 7 being equal to 29 is obviously wrong. It's false. Pythagoras' theorem, which you might remember from school days, will tell you that the square of the slope equals to the sum of the square of the vertical and the base. It's called the hypotenuse, this R. Okay, you might remember that, but it doesn't matter either. But it is true for every right-angled triangle. There are laws of physics, of course. Energy is force times distance, that's true. Euler's equation, which is a bit more complex, I just love that equation for reasons that we can discuss in the next talk. Those things are true. A perpetual motion machine can be built as a statement and will work as a statement is false. It cannot be done. There are laws of physics against it. Biology and the laws of chemistry inside there have determined that life only comes from life. Non-life material does not produce life. That is a true statement. I put the question mark there because there are many people who doubt that. Man evolved from earlier life forms in a random process without purpose or rational reason is false. I put a question mark there because there are many people who believe the opposite. Now, if statements about the observable world can be consistently and repeatedly confirmed to be universally true, we refer to that as a law of nature. So we start off with observation. We make an hypothesis of thinking, okay, it could be like this. Now we got to prove it. We do lots and lots of experiments in this blue box. And if we get it right 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and another 1,000 scientists do the same thing, then we can formulate a law or build the theory about this. We can maybe now build a new device. And the natural laws that we have now got established can be applied to new situations. And when we have Newton's laws, we can now work out a flight to the moon. If we have certain other laws of physics, we can maybe build or develop an iPad or a Boeing 777 or new medication. Or we could, on that, build a new philosophy, a new worldview. That's possible. But, as I said already, nature is prescribed. And when we say prescribed, there must be a superior external agent that put it there. And on the other side, science describes these laws, and we can apply them and we can utilize them. But these laws are now formulated by man and manipulated and handled to do new things. All right? I think the distinction is prescribed and described. Now, the world is very complex, and I've got 3 examples here that I just quickly want to show you. The horizontal axis is complexity, the vertical axis is information. It's not exactly quantified, although one can quantify it. I just want to illustrate a point. Here is the first man-made wheel. It's a wooden wheel. The first one was maybe a rolling stone. But the next more complex system was probably an application of a wheel like a wheelbarrow, okay? Or something even much more simpler than that. After that, somebody had the idea of a bicycle. There were hundreds of years between this, but there's a bicycle. The complexity of building a bicycle is much higher than having a single wheel or a wheelbarrow, you would agree. And so the information content of this idea is much higher. And so we went to, instead of having 1 bicycle, we take 2 bicycles, put a platform between them and an engine, and we've got a first motor car. Then we've got an iconic motor car. But you must admit that this latest one, the Volkswagen, is more complex and contains more information that is put there by a mind, a designer. The next big one may have been a Tesla, and the next one is maybe something that can sort of convert from a vehicle to a flying machine, and could be driverless and pilotless. But in each case, the information content of the person or the mind that designed it is higher, and the complexity is higher. We can do the same thing with a telephone. You understand what I'm trying to say here. In this development, the phone industry, the whole technology behind it became much more complex, and the information content from the designer increased. And we don't know what the future brings. There's another one. A rocket. The Saturn V that went to the moon. We had the shuttle after that. It flew for many, many years, decades in fact. And we've got a space station out there, which is much higher in complexity, and it may become even more so once we get tourism out there at these stations. But the further you go, if you go into life, if you take all the man-made technologies and you put them in this little square that I put there at the origin of this graph, then you see the organized complexity, the measure of interaction of components increases with each one of these technologies that I showed you, and the information content would be much higher. So if we go to something like biology, human biology, as we did in talk number 2, you might remember, then you see this is orders of magnitude higher. These are big numbers of information that is required and complexity that has to be sorted out. And if we now look outwards from the earthbound stuff in the origin here, let's say our solar system, make it even a bit bigger, then the further out you go, the whole complexity and the information content of what we are trying to investigate gets higher and higher and higher. So all I'm trying to show you with these couple of pictures is how much information and how much complexity there is in the world once you get to investigate it so that you can describe it in the terms of science. It is clear that the greater the complexity of a system, the greater the information content, and the system contains more intelligence. It's also clear that the receiver, the user of such complexity, must understand what the inventor had in mind, the creator, let's say, or originator of this idea, and what was the purpose of all this. An example. It is conceivable that some illiterate aborigines from the Amazon jungle, who have never seen a telephone, a laptop, a car, or a book, could make any sense of what they see when they're shown these objects. Images of letters or mathematical equations or traffic signs have no meaning for people like that. A full library of 10,000 individual books, even when we open the book and they can see the writing in there or the printing. They cannot fathom what this book that just contains symbols, what this is all about. This means that information is only useful if the originator who put the letters there and the receiver both know the code, namely English words, German words, Spanish, Vietnamese, whatever it is. They both got to know the code to interpret what they see. One other thing to recognize immediately in connection with information: it's non-material. You cannot define it as energy or material or mass. The weight of my iPad, with and without a 200 Kindle books in it, is exactly the same. The information weighs nothing. The hardware of my computer is connected to my printer, scanner, webcam, and it has many software programs in there in its silicon brain. And without the information that the software provides, the peripherals will not work. And my computer could be quite useless. Why? It's simply because the information is missing. By weighing it, we wouldn't notice. Our own brains hold lots of information about many processes. And I'm not even talking about thinking. I'm talking about the things that we're not even conscious of most of the time. And these programs are successfully running in the background and keeping this body going. The approximately 100 trillion cells of our bodies each have the information to collaborate with each other in certain organs and tissue, to build proteins, and to regulate all processes necessary for life in the form of our DNA. And speaking and understanding a language implies we know a couple of things. We know the words. We use them in the correct situation, the correct words in the correct situation. We pronounce them correctly with the right nuances. Apply the correct syntax in proper sentences for that language. And if the other person does understand us, it is because they also speak the language, and we get mutual understanding, build a relationship, and we can achieve a purpose with conversation and discussion. So language is information between a transmitter or a sender and a receiver. If they are not both involved, there's no point to information. There is no information. What is required is a common system, the letters and the numerals, ABC, 1, 2, 3, etc. Or if it is binary, you must know there are only two symbols, a 0 and a 1, except that it's not a 0 or a 1, it's on and off. There's Braille, which is a completely different language. So you need to know what system we're talking about. There's got to be common vocabulary in that language. Doesn't matter if it's a human language or a sign language or a computer language or written music for that matter. You've got to understand what those words mean. Understanding the exact meaning of that word, as I said, adhere to common grammatical rules of how to construct a sentence so that we do not get confused. And also operators, if we're talking mathematics. You must know we've got 10 digits from 1 to 9 and 0, and we've got 4 operators, plus, minus, divide, and multiply. That's why maths is so simple. You've only got 10 letters, and you've got 4 operators. That's the grammar. Pragmatic understanding of the subject matter has to be absorbed in the brain somehow, so that you know what the reason is why we're doing this, the result, the purpose, or the effect. And of course, then you get other soft things in there, like national culture, sense of humor, appreciation of art or non-appreciation of art. What is the worldview of that person? The body language might also be part of a common system. When I go into an Arab countries or to China, the body language is important, but I may not see all the signals that people are sending to me because I cannot read them. It's happened to me. So our information exchange is only successful if we have a transmitter and we have a receiver. And by default, both have to be intelligent, not as in IQ. minds are meeting when there is a conversation. Now, what I'm trying to say here is this sounds very much like scientific laws, maybe the laws of exchanging information. And yes, indeed, I didn't think this up. There are such laws already. The question is information now material or non-material? What about conscience? What about consciousness? What is that? Where does that sit? It's not in energy, it's not in material, but we all have it. Anything material cannot produce non-material information. For example, I want to illustrate that sentence. Anything material cannot produce non-material information. If you look at the ink in a printed book, you cannot see that as the originator of the story, the information contained in that book. The thoughts and the meaning and the expression in the story had to be put there by a non-material mind. So you can always go backwards if you see something like a book and say, oh, but I see there's information on these pages. Well, yes, if you understand the code, that it's English. If it is Spanish, you might not understand it, okay? You must also know that the ink is not the story, and neither the chemicals that make up the ink are the story. The story is what the mind put there in the form of this code, these words. So the chemicals that make up the ink is not the story. The story has to be printed within a language and with symbols that are universally understood. And if there is information, there must be an intelligent writer for us to understand the story. We cannot just have words in a row. It needs more than that. Surely, that's very understandable. Information is not a property of matter. As I said already, there is no information in the ink. There is no information in the letters in the printed book. Rocks also don't think. If there is information like the crystals and so on, it is because we, the human mind, gets information out of that. But then somebody had to put it there. If there are certain structures in the rock, yes, they didn't just happen to be there by accident. Somebody had to put it there. We had to have the laws of rocks and then get the information out of there. And that holds for anything. Information is not a property of matter. This car had to use a lot of information to be built, yes, but the piece of metal or the rubber in the tire or the glass or whatever else does not in itself have the property of information. I hope you understood that. But information does require a material medium for storage and for transmission. Let me show you. Your brain is a physical entity, right? But it holds a lot of information and memory and stuff like that. In a computer, we use a hard drive for that. Or in the olden days, maybe you wanted to remember the picture of Mona Lisa. You painted Mona Lisa. Then you could have a barcode. If you cannot read barcodes, it's because you don't have the language of barcodes in your head, so you cannot decode these stripes there. The DNA. By the time we discovered there is such a thing as DNA, it was very difficult to read it. The first scientists could not read it. They discovered something that was there already. What we know by now in 2020 is that there is an enormous amount of information stored in the DNA. But the actual chemicals are not the intelligence in the system. And if we take that a bit further and we look at the chromosomes and so on, you know, and the fingerprints that uniquely identify us, or we want a memory of when we're gone, the tombstone, we chisel something on the stone, and the stone itself is not the information giver. It took a human mind and the skill of a mason to put the letters on the rock. The same with the book that we discussed already, or note-taking, or something like that. The notes themselves are neutral, and it's only when a human agent wrote it there and somebody who wrote it there and others who can read it. These days we can put it into video or celluloid movie strips as well. Music is like that. The music that comes from an aerial and is received by a radio, if you look at a radio, that is not the source of information. The information came through the air with certain devices and processes, and somebody in a studio had to record it. And whatever was recorded required a mind to put it there. You understand where I'm going? So all codes of information require an intentional choice and an agreement between the sender and the receiver so that we can make sense of what we receive. The determination of meaning from a set of symbols also requires a mental process, and that in turn requires intelligence. So we want to get meaning out of this. Let me show you. I have a t-shirt. You remember when I introduced the talks, what people interpret as 1 + 1 is 10, and surely that is wrong. But if you know binary code, that's not what it says. It says 1 + 1 is 2 in binary code. The number below that is my present age. You can work it out. Here's computer code. We have numerous languages. Look at the top there, it's Thai, if you guessed it right. The one below is Greek. The ones in the middle there is easy. And then there's Chinese. You know how confusing it is if you don't know the code. You still don't know where you're going, although you see 3 arrows and you've got all that. And here's if you're not mathematically inclined. If you've never heard of Navier-Stokes equations or things like that, you can do nothing with that. Road signs a bit easier. But again, if you take some person out of a jungle in the Amazon who's never seen a road sign, they wonder what this is. If these are just pictures of our gods or what is this? Okay, because they can't relate to a car or traffic either. And then if you arrive in a place like Japan and you've got 5 minutes to change from one platform to another and you want to catch the train, and they're extremely punctual in Japan, and all you can read there are the times and the platform numbers, but you don't know where these trains are going because you cannot read the language. That's very, very intimidating. So sender and receiver, same language, common code of symbols. And of course the DNA as well, that we've now already mentioned. So new information that you want to add to something always requires an intelligent, purposeful interaction between the transmitter and the receiver. The one who puts the new information there and the receiver who's got to pick that up and understand it. Let me give you 3 examples here. Apollo 13, a fuel cell exploded on the way to the moon, and after 2 days or something in the mission, they had to rethink the mission completely with the materials that were on board those 2 spaceships, the lunar module that was attached to it and the command module. And with whatever loose things they had there, paper, plastic or whatever, they had to build something to ensure the survival of these 3 astronauts. They still had to go all the way to the moon, slingshot behind it, and get back to the Earth and survive all that. A specific disease maybe could not be diagnosed. Nobody had ever seen it before. And then additional information came about and enabled the treating doctors to get a correct diagnosis, and they adjusted the treatment and it worked. So new information was added. Without Einstein's relativity theory, and let's say nobody else after him thought of it either, the GPS technology we are using today with satellites would not have been feasible. Leonardo da Vinci could think up wonderful, technologically very advanced ideas, but he couldn't build them with the technology of the day. In other words, he didn't have the information yet that was required to develop these technologies. Inventors are very, very good at introducing new information as long as they don't break the laws of physics, of course, in the process due to ignorance or pride. And I've seen that often. People who don't understand, let's say, fluid dynamics, and they're designing something that can save tons and tons of fuel, but there's a little thing they've never understood. They think that this little thing that they've invented will save the world, and it actually doesn't, and they blow all their pension money on it. All information must be traceable to an intelligent source. Like I said with the radio, if you have an announcement on a car radio, there is no person in that radio. There is no person even in the electric signal that's centered there. As I said earlier on, there is somebody in a studio who is actually a mind that is putting the information there, and it is an intelligent source. So whenever we look at information, we look as far back as we can to see where is the intelligent source for this. Artificial intelligence, you might say, is not like that. Oh, it is like that because somebody had to program the algorithms by which this AI is functioning. And there are, of course, many different types of systems where this can be applied. Biological systems, mathematics, physics, chemistry. And each one of those could be applied at different levels and in a different scope. Okay? And that will every time also increase the complexity, or have an influence at least on the complexity and the amount of information that we have there. We'll just very quickly look at biological systems. Now, DNA, we know, if you look at the pictures there on the left, that the DNA consists of a 4-letter alphabet. There are only 4 letters in the whole alphabet of DNA, and the smallest unit contains 3 pairs. The information density of DNA is unsurpassed. Not even the biggest supercomputer has the type of memory capacity than what DNA has. The head of a needle filled with DNA contains information analogous to books stacked flat on top of each other, reaching all the way to the moon and back, times 500. Okay, so that's a lot of information in the head of a pin. The rudimentary complexity of this information system has taken intelligent scientists over 10 years to unravel. It is totally unreasonable to consider that its origin is evolutionary without purpose. It needed a mind. There is no way DNA could be put together without a mind, an intelligent sender. Can this complex information system be backtraced to a sender? Well, it depends on your worldview, right? And you will believe what is true and what is not true. So how does it compare when measured against the info of these laws? Now, the laws of information were formulated by somebody called Werner Gitt, and you can check it up. There are papers published. You can read books on Werner Gitt and so on. But it is what we said already. Number of symbols and letters and signals in a particular language. They call it statistics, the law of statistics. It has nothing to do with mathematical statistics. That's just what it is called. The second one is there is a set of symbols and rules of grammar. In other words, we must know what type of letters we are using here, and the grammar, the syntax. We must also know what the meaning of the words are in the sentences and the message that we want to get across. That's called semantics. And we want to see what the pragmatic outflow would be, the actions intended from that. And we must know what the purpose is and the actual result. Aprobetics, as it is called. You can check it all out, but the point I just want to make is everything I said so far, that there is a natural law of information. So great. You say to me, so how does Christianity come into this and apologetics? Well, there are a couple of conclusions for you to think about very carefully. Then you will see it. Since the DNA code of all life covers all the points of the laws of information, which is a natural law, remember, we conclude there must be a sender or a transmitter or an originator, whatever you want to call him, God if you like. A superior mind had to create this. that would actually imply that atheism is a completely erroneous idea, because it operates on the principle that there is only material and energy in the universe. There's no information, remember? Not when it comes to the philosophy of the atheist. That would be as wrong as to say perpetual motion machine is possible, or the laws of thermodynamics are not true, or that 4 times 7 is actually 28. That would be a true statement, which it isn't. So we must be able to discern on the basis of this. Since the density and complexity of DNA encoded information is billions and billions of times greater than man's current technology, the sender must be super intelligent. Surely we can all see that. Infinitely more intelligent from our human perspective. So this sender is infinite in intelligence and in information concerning all that there is to know about every single aspect on this planet, if we just stick to the planet, of every living thing, of everything that happened in the past, everything that happens now, and everything that will happen in the future. That is the nature of this sender. Because this sender must have encoded the DNA information, constructed the biological processes and machinery required for encoding, decoding, and processing, and had to have designed all the features of the original life forms. And the sender must be purposeful and supremely powerful, definitely compared to us. But since information is non-material and it's a fundamental entity, remember, and it cannot originate from material attributes, we conclude that the sender must be a non-material entity. Maybe you must go through this slide again. But that is very important. So when we are talking about a sender who's got to do all this, and this sender or transmitter or originator or creator cannot originate from material attributes, we have to conclude that the sender himself is a non-material entity. He must thus be an infinite and eternal God outside time and space. And Genesis 1:1 says that exactly. In the Bible, God starts off right away of saying, in the beginning, and the Hebrew word means before time even began. God, Elohim Elohim in Hebrew, or the original language, meaning the creator. And it is actually used in very specific places in Scripture. But anyway, so let's just agree on that. He must be infinite and eternal. He must be omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent. Okay? Because all power lies in this intelligent mind. He's a non-material spirit being. There must be a sender or an originator due to existing information and complexity that we observe in the world around us. There must be such a sender. And what does the old Bible say? The Bible that many of you don't want to believe in, that's fine. However, it says in there, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Let's go back to the left again. The sender must be omniscient, of infinite intelligence and wisdom. And in Isaiah it says, now we can see God knows all things. And it includes everything. The sender must also be omnipotent. The sender must be non-material. And as a spirit, he would also be omnipresent, timeless and eternal. And in the Bible, he talks of himself as I am the Alpha and the Omega, who is and was and who is to come. I am the Almighty. From everlasting to everlasting, he is God. Who is this sender? Has he got a name? He is the self-proclaimed author of the Word of God. Yes, man has written it down, but somebody was the mind behind it to say to Moses, write it down. Genesis 1 is very clear when he says, God said, and it was. It was that simple. But that's spirit. We cannot imagine that. We cannot imagine that out of nothing, God said, let there be, and there was. And you say, well, that's a fairy story. Well, I think the alternative fairy story is atheism, which we've now already shown scientifically, is actually false. He spoke, he commanded, and it stood firm. In John 1, the Gospel of John, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and He was with Him in the beginning. That's Genesis 1:1. Through Him all things were made. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. Genesis 1:1. In biblical terms, the Word, the Logos, is actually Jesus. And Jesus is called the Christ, or the Messiah. Now note, besides the laws of information developed by man on the basis of observation, examination, and yet never falsified, the Word of God, the Bible, has a higher level of authority when it comes to information to learn about this person called Jesus and his characteristics. It is thus worth reading and studying. Remember, you joined these couple of talks voluntarily to find out what is rational and what is reasonable, and how science and Christianity is compatible. Well, that's what I've tried to show you here. Since information is non-material and information cannot originate from material entities, and it came down on us, the receivers, we must conclude that man also has a non-material component or a spirit component. Otherwise, we couldn't understand this. Hence, man and woman, of course, is made in the image of God, also from Genesis. It means exactly that. If God is spirit as the ultimate sender, and we have a part of that due to being created in the image of God, and matter has no mind or consciousness or inherent intelligence, we established that. There are a couple, 5 points, and then we will finish. The atheist says man is only matter. But man is insignificant in this oversized universe. Man is without purpose, and ultimately he doesn't matter. But that is a wrong statement and has been falsified just in the last half an hour. The universe consists only of mass and energy is thus also false as a conclusion, because there's also information in this world and life in this universe. Biological information about origin can also only come from a mind, like an intelligent sender. Life begets life, you remember, and Jesus says, and here's a dangerous statement for those who doubt if Jesus was a real person. He said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And now you have 3 choices. Either he lies, or he's a lunatic, or he is who he says he is. And let's face it, he died for that. So he knew what he was doing. He was not a liar. Liars are usually cowards. And he was certainly not a lunatic. In fact, all ideas, all philosophies and concepts that originate from materialist sources alone, no matter how scientific it might sound, they are still false. Anyone who disagrees with the laws of information, which are natural laws, must falsify them by demonstrating the origin of information from purely material sources. And you know what? That has never happened. As we said many times, I don't have all the answers, but I've got enough answers to know that Christianity and science is rational and reasonable and can actually work together. In fact, they must work together. And that is why science was at that age much more useful in the Western world than it was, for example, in Arabia or current day China.